She was accused of stealing and labeled a criminal. But when the sheriff looked closer, he saw something everyone else missed, something that would change not only her life, but his own forever. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this. The scorching Arizona sun beat down on the dusty streets of Copper Creek as Sheriff Thomas Morgan wiped the sweat from his brow. It was the summer of 1885, and the small frontier town was experiencing one of the hottest seasons on record. Thomas had been sheriff for nearly a decade, a job that had aged him beyond his 40 years, carving deep lines into his weathered face. "Sheriff! Sheriff Morgan!" The frantic voice of Henry Wilson, the general store owner, cut through the afternoon. "Quiet. We caught a thief, an Apache girl." Thomas sighed, setting aside the paperwork on his desk. Tensions between settlers and the local Apache tribe had been brewing for months, and this incident would only make matters worse. In the general store, a small crowd had gathered around a teenage girl with long black hair and fierce dark eyes. Her hands were bound with rope, her chin held high despite the hostile stares surrounding her. Several food items lay scattered on the floor: jerky, canned beans, and a small sack of flour. "Found her stuffing these in her clothes," Henry explained. His face flushed with anger. "Filthy thief." Thomas studied the girl. She was thin, too thin, and her clothes were worn and dirty. She looked to be about 15 or 16, with a defiant expression that couldn't quite mask her fear. "What's your name?" Thomas asked, his voice firm, but not unkind. The girl remained silent, her gaze fixed on a point beyond his shoulder. "She won't talk," Henry spat. "Probably doesn't even understand English." "These savages." "That's enough, Henry," Thomas cut him off sharply. He knelt to gather the stolen items, noting how basic and essential they were. Not luxuries, but survival necessities. "I'll handle this," he told the crowd. "Everyone back to your business." As Thomas led the girl to the jailhouse, he noticed how she scanned the surroundings, as if searching for something or someone. Inside the modest building with its 2 cells, he removed the ropes from her wrists. "I'm Sheriff Morgan," he said, offering her a cup of water, which she reluctantly accepted. "I need to know your name." After a long silence, she finally spoke. Her English halting but clear. "Nita, Nita," he repeated. "Why were you stealing food, Nita?" She remained silent, rubbing her wrists where the rope had chafed them raw. Thomas sighed. "I need to know if you're from the reservation. I need to know who your family is." "No reservation," she said firmly. "No family." Something about her declaration didn't ring true to Thomas, who had spent years reading people's faces for lies. He decided to take a different approach. "You must be hungry," he said, retrieving bread and jerky from his desk drawer, his own lunch. "Eat something, and we'll talk after." As Nita ate, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency that revealed her hunger, Thomas watched her thoughtfully. Most thieves in her position would have been scared, remorseful, or aggressively defiant. But Nita seemed preoccupied. Her eyes kept darting to the small window facing the street. "Are you waiting for someone, Nita?" he asked. The question visibly startled her. Her hand froze halfway to her mouth, and for just a moment, raw panic flashed across her face before she controlled it. "No," she said too quickly. That evening, as the sun painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Thomas made a decision that surprised even himself. The town council would want the girl punished, likely sent to a government school for proper civilization, or worse, charged as an adult. Neither option sat right with him. "Nita," he said, unlocking the cell door, "I'm taking you to my home tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." Her suspicious glance spoke volumes. "I live alone," he explained. "My wife died 5 years ago. We never had children. I have a spare room. It's better than this cell." "Why?" she asked, the first question she'd initiated. Thomas considered her question carefully. "Because I believe there's more to your story than stealing food," he finally said. And I'd like to know what it is before this town makes up its mind about you." At Thomas's modest home on the outskirts of town, he showed Nita to a small bedroom that had once been meant for the children he and Sarah never had. As he prepared a simple dinner, he noticed Nita wrapping some of the food in a napkin, tucking it into her pocket when she thought he wasn't looking. Later that night, a noise woke Thomas from his light sleep, the soft creak of the front door. He grabbed his gun and moved silently through the darkened house, only to catch sight of Nita slipping outside. Instead of calling out, he followed her at a distance. She moved with purpose through the moonlit landscape, heading toward an abandoned mining shack about half a mile from town. Thomas watched as she knelt beside a small figure huddled in the doorway, a child no more than 6 or 7 years old. "Kimi," Nita whispered, her voice carrying in the night stillness. "I brought food. Are you hurt?" The pieces suddenly fell into place for Thomas. Nita wasn't stealing for herself. She was trying to feed her sister. Thomas remained hidden, observing as Nita tenderly wrapped a blanket around the small child's shoulders. The younger girl's resemblance to Nita was unmistakable, the same delicate features, though her face was rounder with youth. But unlike her older sister's defiance, this child's eyes held nothing but fear and exhaustion. "You must eat, Kimi," Nita urged, unwrapping the food she'd taken from Thomas's table. "Slowly now." Thomas stepped forward deliberately, making enough noise that his approach wouldn't startle them. Nita immediately pushed her sister behind her, assuming a protective stance. "So this is why you were stealing," Thomas said quietly, holstering his gun to appear less threatening. Nita's eyes narrowed. "We go now. You not stop us." "Stop you from what? Going where?" Thomas kept his distance, aware of how frightened the little girl appeared. "Nita, it's the middle of the night. Your sister looks exhausted and hungry." "Men look for us," Nita said, her voice tight with fear beneath the defiance. "Bad men." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "What men, Nita? Who's looking for you?" For a long moment, she said nothing, clearly weighing whether to trust him. The little girl, Kimi, whispered something in Apache that Thomas couldn't understand. Whatever she said caused Nita's shoulders to slump slightly. "Men from agency," she finally admitted. "Say Kimi go to school far away. Say I too old, must work for white family." Thomas understood immediately. Government agents had been separating Apache families, sending children to distant boarding schools while placing teenagers as servants in white households, all in the name of civilization. The practice disgusted him. "Is that why you ran away? To keep your sister with you?" Nita nodded once, her eyes never leaving his face. "Where are your parents?" "Dead," she said flatly. "Soldiers come, many sick after. Mother, father die. Only Nita, Kimi now." The familiar story of disease following military confrontations with the tribes twisted Thomas's gut. He'd seen it too many times, entire families decimated by illnesses their bodies had no defense against. "Listen to me, Nita," he said carefully. "I'm not going to separate you from your sister. But that shack isn't safe, and you can't keep stealing food. You'll be caught again, and next time, I might not be able to help you." He watched indecision war across her features. Little Kimi peered around her sister, her dark eyes studying Thomas with a child's direct curiosity. "Come back to my house," Thomas continued. "Both of you. You'll have a proper place to sleep, food to eat. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to do next. I promise no one will take either of you anywhere." "Why you help?" Nita demanded, suspicion evident in her tone. Thomas thought about Sarah, about the children they'd dreamed of having before illness had taken her. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because nobody should have to fight so hard just to stay with their family." At the house, Thomas heated soup while Nita helped Kimi wash up. The younger girl remained silent around him, but he could hear her whispering to her sister in their native language. When they emerged, Kimi's face was clean, her hair neatly braided by Nita's careful hands. Over the simple meal, Thomas learned more about their situation. Their parents had died during a fever outbreak at the San Carlos Reservation nearly a year ago. With no other family to claim them, The sisters had been targeted for separation by agency officials implementing the government's assimilation policies. "We run 3 moons ago," Nita explained, watching as Kimi drowsily leaned against her shoulder. "Hide in mountains, come to town for food sometimes. Kimi's sick once, very scared." "And the men looking for you? Have you seen them in Copper Creek?" Nita nodded gravely. "2 days ago. Man with paper, asking questions. We hide better after." Thomas rubbed his chin thoughtfully. If government agents were actively searching for the girls, his position as sheriff complicated matters significantly. Harboring them could cost him his badge or worse. "Tomorrow I'll go into town and see what I can find out," he decided. "You and Kimi stay here, inside the house. Don't go near the windows. Can you do that?" After settling the exhausted girls in the spare bedroom, Thomas sat at his kitchen table long into the night, turning over possibilities in his mind. By dawn, he had made his decision. The next morning, he rode into town earlier than usual, nodding to the few citizens already about their business. At the telegraph office, he sent a message to an old friend, a lawyer in Tucson, who had often represented native interests against government overreach. In the general store, Thomas casually inquired about any strangers in town, confirming Nita's story when Henry mentioned government men asking questions about runaway Indian children. "Shame about those orphans," Thomas remarked carefully. "Heard they might have headed north toward the territories." "Good riddance," Henry muttered. "We don't need more of their kind around here." Thomas bit back a sharp retort, reminding himself of the delicate position he was in. Instead, he purchased additional supplies, children's clothing, extra food, and a small doll that caught his eye. Before heading back to his house, he found Nita teaching Kimi how to mend a torn seam in her dress, using needle and thread she discovered in Sarah's old sewing basket. The domestic scene struck him with unexpected force, his empty house suddenly alive with the presence of children. "I've sent for help," he told Nita, setting down his purchases. "A friend who knows the law. Until he responds, you and Kimi will stay here." Kimi looked up at him with solemn eyes before turning to her sister and asking a question in Apache. Nita replied softly, then turned to Thomas. "She asks if you are like the other white men who take children." Thomas knelt to meet Kimi's gaze directly. "No, little one. I'm not going to take you anywhere you don't want to go. And I won't let anyone separate you from your sister." He didn't know if she understood his words, but something in his expression must have reassured her, because she offered him a tiny, hesitant smile, the first he'd seen from her. That evening, as Thomas prepared dinner with Nita's help, he realized, with startling clarity, that he'd already begun to think of the girls not as temporary guests, but as something more permanent. The thought both frightened and exhilarated him. "Sheriff," Nita said suddenly, interrupting his thoughts, "what happens when your friend comes?" "His name is James," Thomas replied. "And he'll help us find a legal way for you and Kimi to stay together and stay safe." "With you?" she asked, her expression unreadable. Thomas measured his words carefully. "If that's what you both want." "Yes, with me, but that's a decision for another day." As night fell over the small house, Thomas found himself standing in the doorway of the spare bedroom, watching the sisters sleep. Kimi curled trustingly against Nita's side, their breathing deep and even. For the first time in years, his home felt like more than just a place to lay his head. "Sarah," he whispered, to the memory of his wife, "I think I finally understand what you meant about family being more than just blood." A week passed with the girls hidden safely in Thomas's home. Each day brought small changes, Kimi's fearful silence gradually giving way to curious questions in her limited English, Nita's suspicious wariness softening as she observed Thomas's consistent kindness. For his part, Thomas found himself adjusting his bachelor routines to accommodate the presence of children with surprising ease. On a warm Thursday afternoon, as Thomas taught Kimi how to play checkers while Nita prepared vegetables for dinner, a knock at the door froze them all in place. "Hide," Thomas whispered urgently. In the back bedroom. Once the girls had disappeared, Thomas composed himself and opened the door to find a tall man in a well-worn suit standing on his porch. "Sheriff Morgan?" The man extended his hand. James Hollister, your telegram said it was urgent. Relief washed over Thomas as he recognized his old friend. James, thank God. Come in, but keep your voice down. Once inside, Thomas quickly explained the situation while James listened intently, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound book. So you've essentially been harboring 2 Apache children the government is actively searching for, James summarized, rubbing his temple. Thomas, do you realize the legal quicksand you're standing in? I couldn't just turn them over, Thomas defended. You know what happens to these children in those so-called schools. And splitting them up after everything they've been through. James held up a hand. I'm not saying you did the wrong thing morally. I'm saying legally we're walking a tightrope. He paused. Where are they now? Thomas called softly toward the hallway, and after a moment, Nita emerged cautiously, keeping Kimi partially hidden behind her. Girls, this is Mr. Hollister, the friend I told you about. He's here to help us. James smiled gently. Hello, Nita. Hello, Kimi. You can call me James. He switched smoothly into basic Apache greetings, which caused Kimi's eyes to widen in surprise. You speak our words? Nita asked, clearly impressed despite herself. Only a little, James admitted. I've worked with your people before. Over dinner, James explained the complex legal situation to Thomas, while the girls listened attentively. The Indian Affairs agents have paperwork classifying Nita and Kimi as wards of the government following their parents' deaths, he said. Under current policy, they have full authority to place the children wherever they see fit, separate boarding schools, work placements, even adoption into white families. But they're sisters, Thomas protested. Surely there must be some consideration for keeping families together. James's expression grew grim. You know as well as I do that family means something very different to the government when it comes to native children. Nita, who had been following the conversation closely, spoke up. We not go to different places, we stay together. That's what we want too, Nita, James assured her. And I think I see a path forward, though it's not without risk. He turned to Thomas. How committed are you to these children, Thomas? Not just to helping them temporarily, but to their future? Thomas felt the weight of 3 pairs of eyes on him. Completely, he said without hesitation. Whatever it takes. Then, our best option is legal adoption, James stated. You, as a respected law officer with an impeccable reputation, petition to adopt both girls as your legal daughters. The word daughters sent a jolt through Thomas. He glanced at Nita, whose expression had grown intensely focused. Would that work? Thomas asked. The government would just let me adopt them? Not easily, James cautioned. We'd need to argue that the girls have already begun successful assimilation under your guidance. That separating them would cause undue trauma. That your position in the community makes you uniquely qualified to ensure they become productive citizens. I'm using their language, not mine, he added with distaste. And if Thomas adopts us, Nita said slowly, testing the unfamiliar concept, men cannot take Kimi away? Or me? Not legally, James confirmed. You would be his children under the law. Later that night, after James had retired to the spare room and the girls were asleep in Thomas's bedroom, Thomas sat alone on his porch, contemplating the magnitude of what he was considering. Becoming a father, not just temporarily, but legally and permanently, to 2 Apache girls in a town where many viewed their people with suspicion or outright hostility. The sound of the door opening interrupted his thoughts. Nita stepped out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night chill. You think hard, she observed, sitting beside him on the porch step. Thomas smiled faintly. Yes, I am. About making us your children? About what that means, he clarified. For all of us, it's a big change, Nita. She was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the star-filled sky. When our parents died, I promised to keep Kimi safe, always, but his heart alone. Her voice faltered slightly. She needs more than just me. And what do you need, Nita? Thomas asked gently. The question seemed to surprise her. No one asked that before. She considered it carefully. I need Kimi safe. I need not to be afraid always. I need. She hesitated. I need to belong somewhere again. You could belong here, Thomas said softly. Both of you. It won't be easy. There will be people in town who won't understand or approve. But this could be your home if you want it to be. Why you do this? Nita asked, the question that had clearly been troubling her from the beginning. Why risk for Apache girls? Thomas thought about Sarah, about the family they'd planned together, about the emptiness in his life since losing her. But there was more to it than just filling a void. Because when I found you stealing food to keep your sister alive, I saw something I recognized, he said slowly. The kind of courage and love that makes a family. And maybe ... maybe I've been looking for a family to belong to again, too. The next morning brought new purpose. James outlined his strategy. They would need character references from respected community members, documentation of the girls' progress in education and assimilation, and evidence that Thomas could provide a stable home. The agency men are still in the area, James warned. We need to move quickly before they track the girls here. For the next 2 weeks, Thomas began carefully introducing the idea to selected townspeople he trusted. The town's schoolteacher, Miss Henderson, agreed to attest to the girls' educational progress after spending time with them. Dr. Wilson, who had always treated native patients with the same care as white ones, provided medical examinations and documentation of their health. Not everyone was supportive. Mayor Williams expressed concern about the precedent it would set, and several townspeople openly questioned Thomas's judgment. But to his surprise, others stepped forward with unexpected support, Mrs. Peterson from the bakery bringing fresh bread and offering to teach Kimi baking, Reverend Jackson speaking publicly about Christian charity transcending racial boundaries. Nita, ever observant, noticed the changing dynamics in town. Some people look at us differently now, she remarked one evening as they walked back from the general store, where Thomas had begun taking them for short, carefully timed visits. How so? Thomas asked. Like we are people, she said simply. Not just Apache. Thomas felt both pride in his community and sadness that such basic recognition should seem remarkable to her. The turning point came unexpectedly. During Sunday services, which Thomas had begun attending with the girls, little Kimi, who had been learning English songs from Miss Henderson, joined in the hymn singing, her clear, sweet voice rising above the congregation. After the initial surprise, the church fell silent except for Kimi's innocent voice carrying the melody of Amazing Grace. When she finished, there was a moment of profound silence before Reverend Jackson placed his hand gently on her head. Truly, the Lord speaks through the voices of children, he said, his eyes suspiciously moist, and reminds us that we are all his children, regardless of where we were born or the color of our skin. That afternoon, as they shared Sunday dinner with James, who had been working tirelessly on their case, the lawyer smiled broadly. I think we've reached a tipping point, he announced. The petition for adoption has significant community support. Now, more importantly, I've uncovered a procedural error in the original wardship papers filed by the agency. What does that mean? Thomas asked, hope rising in his chest. It means, James said, that with one more day of preparation, we can file our petition with the territorial court. And I believe we have a fighting chance of success. That night, as Thomas tucked Kimi into bed, a ritual that had become precious to both of them, she looked up at him with solemn eyes. Thomas, she said, using his name directly for the first time, if you become our father, what do we call you? The simple question caught him off guard, emotion welling unexpectedly in his throat. Well, he managed, you could call me Thomas still, or you could call me Pa if you wanted to. Kimi considered this seriously before nodding. I think I would like to call you Pa, she decided, then added with the directness of a child. I don't remember my first Pa's face anymore. But I think he would be happy I have a new one. Thomas swallowed hard, gently brushing her hair back from her forehead. I think he would be too, little one. And I promise I'll do my best to be worthy of that honor. in the doorway unnoticed by either of them. Nita watched the exchange, a single tear tracking silently down her cheek. The courthouse in Tucson bustled with activity as Thomas, James, Nita, and Kimi made their way through the imposing doors. Thomas felt the weight of stairs following them, a white sheriff in his best suit alongside two Apache girls dressed in the new clothes Mrs. Peterson had helped sew for the occasion. "Remember," James murmured as they found their seats, "let me do the talking. The judge may ask the girls some questions, but otherwise, stay calm and dignified." Thomas nodded, his throat tight with anxiety. Across the aisle, he spotted two men in government suits, Indian Affairs agents who had filed an objection to the adoption petition. One of them was studying Nita with cold calculation that made Thomas's protective instincts flare. Kimi's small hand slipped into his, and he squeezed it gently. "It's going to be all right," he whispered, as much to reassure himself as her. "All rise for the Honorable Judge William Harmon," the bailiff announced. The proceedings began with formal introductions. James presented their petition with eloquent precision, emphasizing the community support, the girls' successful integration, and Thomas's exemplary character. Then came the opposition. "Your Honor," the taller agent began, "these children are wards of the government under the Indian Appropriations Act. Sheriff Morgan has no blood relation or tribal connection to justify this highly irregular adoption request." "And yet," Judge Harmon replied, peering over his spectacles, "I have before me letters from a schoolteacher, a doctor, a reverend, and 12 other respected citizens of Copper Creek, attesting to the positive environment Sheriff Morgan has provided. With all due respect, Your Honor, sentiment cannot override policy," the agent persisted. "The federal government has established programs specifically designed for assimilating Indian children into proper society. By separating sisters who have already lost their parents," James countered, his voice controlled but passionate, "by sending a 7-year-old hundreds of miles from her only remaining family." The debate continued, legal arguments flowing back and forth, while Thomas felt increasingly helpless. The technical language and policy citations seemed far removed from the simple truth he knew that these girls belonged with him, and he with them. After nearly an hour, Judge Harmon raised his hand. "I'd like to hear from the children themselves." He looked kindly toward Nita and Kimi. "Young ladies, would you approach the bench?" Thomas gave them an encouraging nod as they walked forward. Kimi clung to her sister's hand, her earlier confidence wavering in the formal setting. "Now then," the judge said, his tone gentler than it had been during the legal arguments. "Nita, is that correct? How old are you, child?" 16 summers, sir," she replied clearly, standing straight despite her obvious nervousness. "And you understand what Sheriff Morgan is proposing? That he wishes to legally adopt you and your sister as his daughters?" "Yes, sir. He wishes to be our father. And is that what you want?" Nita glanced back at Thomas before answering. "When our parents died, I thought no one would ever care for us again. I thought I must be mother, father, everything to Kimi." Her voice grew stronger. "Sheriff Thomas, he does not try to make us forget who we are. He learns our words, we learn his. He says we can keep our Apache names and also have new ones for school." She paused. "He makes us feel safe." The judge nodded thoughtfully, then turned his attention to Kimi. "And you, little one, what do you think about all this?" Kimi looked up at the imposing figure behind the tall desk. For a moment, Thomas feared she might be too intimidated to speak, but then her clear voice filled the courtroom. "I call him Pa now," she said simply. "He reads me stories and teaches me checkers and never gets angry when I speak Apache. And he promised nobody will take me away from Nita ever." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Thank you, girls. You may return to your seats." As the legal arguments resumed, Thomas found himself watching not the judge or the lawyers, but the girls' Nita's protective arm around Kimi's shoulders, the way they leaned slightly toward him despite the formal separation of the courtroom. Somehow, in just a few short weeks, they had become a family in all the ways that truly mattered. Now they were fighting for the law to recognize what their hearts already knew. After what seemed an eternity, Judge Harmon cleared his throat. I've heard sufficient arguments from both sides. This court will recess for 1 hour while I consider my ruling. The longest hour of Thomas's life followed. They waited in a small anteroom, none of them able to eat the sandwiches James had thoughtfully provided. Kimi dozed against Thomas's side while Nita paced the small space, her anxiety evident in every tense line of her body. What if he says no? She finally voiced the fear haunting them all. Then we appeal, James answered promptly. And if necessary, we find another way. I promise you, Nita, we won't give up. When they returned to the courtroom, Thomas noticed more spectators had gathered. Word had apparently spread about the unusual case. He recognized several faces from Copper Creek who had made the journey to Tucson to show their support. All rise, the bailiff announced as Judge Harmon returned. Be seated, the judge instructed, arranging papers before him. This case presents complex questions about the intersection of federal Indian policy and territorial adoption statutes. It also raises profound moral considerations about the welfare of children who have already endured significant trauma. Thomas held his breath, feeling Nita tense beside him. The Indian Affairs Office has established protocols with which this court cannot lightly interfere, the judge continued, causing Thomas's heart to sink. However, he added, looking directly at the girls, this court is also bound to consider the best interests of the children in question. He shuffled his papers again. I have reviewed the community testimonials, the educational assessments, and most importantly, I have observed the clear bond that has formed between Sheriff Morgan and these children. It is the finding of this court that the stability, security, and family unity offered by this adoption outweigh the standardized approach advocated by the agency. Thomas barely dared to breathe as the judge continued. Therefore, the petition for adoption is granted, with the provision that the children shall continue their education and maintain appropriate connections to their cultural heritage as they assimilate into their new family circumstances. The judge banged his gavel. This court recognizes the creation of a new family today. Sheriff Thomas Morgan is henceforth the legal father of Nita Morgan and Kimi Morgan. May you build a life of harmony and mutual respect together. For a moment, Thomas sat frozen in disbelief until James clapped him on the shoulder. Congratulations, Thomas. You're officially a father. The reality of those words broke through his shock. Thomas turned to the girls, his daughters, and opened his arms. Kimi launched herself into his embrace immediately, while Nita moved more slowly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. We're a family now, he told them, his voice rough with emotion. By law as well as by choice. As they left the courthouse, stepping into the bright Arizona sunshine, several townspeople came forward to offer congratulations. Mrs. Peterson hugged both girls, whispering something to Nita that made her smile through her tears. Reverend Jackson shook Thomas's hand firmly. You've done a righteous thing, Sheriff. Your wife would be proud. The journey home to Copper Creek was filled with quiet joy and plans for the future. Thomas and James discussed practical matters, enrolling the girls in school, adapting the house to better accommodate a family, the legal documents they would need for various aspects of their new life together. As they approached the outskirts of town, Thomas noticed Nita gazing at the landscape with a pensive expression. What are you thinking about? He asked her. About paths, she replied thoughtfully. My mother said life is many paths, and the one that looks hardest sometimes leads to the best places. Thomas nodded, understanding her meaning. The day you were caught stealing seems like the worst luck imaginable. And yet it led here, she finished, gesturing to include Kimi dozing between them on the wagon seat. To family again. When they reached Thomas's house, their house now, he paused before opening the door. We should mark this moment, he said. This is the first day of our family's official existence. Kimi's face lit up. Like a birthday? Thomas laughed. Exactly like a birthday. For our family. Inside they found the house transformed. Mrs. Peterson, Miss Henderson and several other townswomen had apparently ridden ahead of them. The table was set for dinner. A small cake sat on the sideboard, and a hand-stitched banner reading, "Welcome, Home Morgan Family," hung across the main room. But what drew Thomas's eye was the new photograph frame on the mantel. Inside was a portrait of the three of them, taken in Tucson before the hearing, Thomas standing tall in his best suit, Kimi beaming in her new dress, and Nita with a gentle, hopeful smile that softened her usually serious features. Beneath it, someone had placed Sarah's Bible, open to a passage Thomas recognized immediately. Love is patient, love is kind. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. As neighbors began arriving with welcoming gifts and dishes for an impromptu celebration, Thomas watched his daughters, the words still new and wonderful in his mind, greeting people who had once been strangers, but were now part of their extended community. Later that night, after the visitors had departed and the girls had gone to sleep in their room, no longer the spare bedroom but truly theirs, Thomas sat on the porch, looking up at the same stars that had witnessed his lonely contemplation just weeks before. "We did it, Sarah," he whispered to the night sky. "I know this isn't the family we planned, but I think you would love them as much as I do." The sound of the door opening made him turn. Nita stepped out, now familiar with his habit of evening reflection. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head, sitting beside him. "Too many thoughts." They sat in comfortable silence for a while before she spoke again. "Thomas, father, I want to tell you something I never told." The tentative use of father warmed his heart. "What is it?" "The day in store, when they catch me stealing," she began hesitantly. "I saw you before, many times in town, watching how you talk to people, even Apache people, with respect. How you stop white boys from throwing stones at old native woman." She looked down at her hands. "I choose your store to steal from because I think maybe, if caught, you would be one to find me, not other men." Thomas stared at her, astonished. "You deliberately got caught? By me?" She nodded slowly. "Was dangerous chance, but Kami was sick, needed help. I think maybe you have good heart. You risked everything on that belief." Thomas sighed, humbled by her revelation. "Sometimes heart knows what mind cannot see," Nita replied with a wisdom beyond her years. "My mother taught this." Thomas placed his arm gently around her shoulders, and for the first time, she leaned into the embrace without hesitation. "Your mother would be proud of how you've protected Kimi," he told her softly. "And I am honored that you chose to trust me with your sister and with yourself." Above them, the stars continued their eternal watch over the small house where an unlikely family had found its beginning. A family formed not by blood, but by choice, by courage, and by the kind of love that builds bridges across the deepest divides.